Hi guys, in this video we're going to be learning about if statements. So if statements enable us to perform a certain action based on a condition. Let's start with an example. So back in our application class, in the main method, I'm going to create a variable. So int number equals 500. And underneath that, I'm going to type out if, which is a Java reserved word, parentheses, leave a space, curly brackets. And this is the basic structure of an if statement. So you have if, we're going to put something inside here, so this will be our condition. And when that condition is true, we're going to execute whatever code is within the curly brackets. So let's say number equals 400. And if that's true, then we're going to print out, so we're going to use our sout statement, value printed out. So what are we doing here? We're saying that if the number, which we know has a value of 500, if it equals 400, and notice the fact that we're using double equals rather than a single equals. If we were to do this, it wouldn't work. So we need to use a double equals, and that is the equality operator. So this is a conditional operator in Java, whereas a single equals is an assignment operator. We're assigning 500 to the variable number. This is a conditional operator. We also have more than, and we'll use them in further examples. So if number equals 400, then print out the value. We know that number's 500, so this will resolve to false, and it will not print out the statement, because this is false, so it doesn't execute the code within the if block. Let's run the application, and as you can see here, it's run, and nothing has been printed out. If I change this to 500, number, we know that that equals 500, and we're now saying, does 500 equal 500? This will resolve to true, and it will execute the content within the if block. So let's run the application again, and you can now see that it's printed out the statement written here. If we were to say more than 400, so this is another example of a conditional operator. So number, again, is 500, and number more than 400 resolves to true because 500 is more than 400. Run the application, prints it out again. If I was to change number to perhaps 300 and run the application again, it doesn't print it out because 300 is not more than 400. But 300 is less than 400, so if I was to change that to a less than symbol, now 300 is less than 400, which of course is true, so it will print out the statement here. Run the application, and you can see it's printed out. Now let's try something a little bit more complex within the if block. So what we're going to do here is use the modulus. So number modulus 50 equals 0. So what we're saying here is that we're going to print out this statement if number divides into 50 with no remainder. So what we're going to do here is we're going to print out this statement if 50 divides into number, which we know is 300, a set number of times with no remainder. Because as we said before, a modulus will always return us the remainder. And if that remainder is 0, we're going to print it out. In other words, we're saying that number divided by 50 fits in a set number of times with no remainder. So let's run that. And you can see that it's printed it out because 50 goes into 300 a set number of times, so it goes in 6 times with no remainder. If I was to use something else like 70, for example, that will have a remainder because 70 does not go into 300 a set number of times. There will be a remainder from that. So if I was to run the application again, you can see that it's not printed out because this is now false. If I wanted to make this resolve to true, I could simply make this more than 0 because we know that the remainder is going to be more than 0. Run the application and you can see that it's printed out. Now let's take things one step further. We're going to have a variable called score, and that's going to represent an exam score. And what we want to do is, based on that exam score, we want to print out what the grade of that exam score will be. So let's say a score of more than 80 will be an A, a score of more than 70 will be a B, and a score of more than 60 will be a C. Anything below that will require a retake of that test. And we can do that with a set of if statements. So let's remove this code and let's type out int score equals 75. So we're going to say that the starting score is 75. And I'm going to write out if score is more than 80 because we said that we require at least 80, we're going to print out your score is A. Else if, so we're going to say that if the score is not more than 80, it will then go to the next set of if statements. And then we're going to type else if score is more than 70, system out print line, your score is B. So here, if score is more than 80, resolves to false, which in this case it will, because score is only 75. So this will resolve to false, in which case it will then go to the next if statement, which is if the score is more than 70, which is true. So it'll print out your score is B. And finally, else if score is more than 60, S out, which is our shorthand for the printout statement, hit enter, quotation marks, your score is C. And I'm just going to make that a capital Y. So now we're saying if the score is more than 80, print out your score is A. Otherwise, if the score is more than 70, your score is B. And otherwise, if the score is more than 60, print out C. And as we said before, we also want to say that if it's less than that, then you should retake the test. So here we can simply use else. We don't need to use else if, because we don't need a condition here. We're simply saying if it doesn't fall within this condition, or this condition, then go here. So we're going to print out, please retake the test. So let's run this application, and you can see that it's printed out your score is B. So let's run through that one more time. Firstly, it hits this. So if the score is more than 80, this resolves to false, in which case it goes to the next one. If the score is more than 70, score is 75, so 75 is more than 70, in which case that's true. So it will print this out, and it will therefore bypass your score is C, and please retake the test, because this has evaluated to true. If we were to provide a value of less than 60, so let's say that the score for this was 50, and run the application again, please retake the test. So again, this would be false, this would be false, this would be false, and we've said here that if it's anything else, we want to print out, please retake the test. One thing to note here is if, for example, a student scores 60, so let's say they score 60, and if we run the application, currently it's going to tell us that they need to retake the test. Please retake the test. And that's because once we get down to our third if statement, we say if the score is more than 60. Now the score is exactly 60, and we know that 60 is not more than 60, it's equal to it. So what we can do is if we want to allow the student with a score of 60 to get a C, we can simply say more than or equal to. So this will basically mean that if the score is more than or equal to 60, then they've scored a C. If I run the application again, you'll now see that it says your score is C. And that also works the other way around. So if it was a less than, we can do that in the same way. So you can do that less than or equal to, and it would look like this. More than or equal to, and it would look like this. And we can do the same thing for the 70 and the 80. So if you were to score exactly 70 and not 71, you would then score a B. Whereas right now, if I was to score a value of 70, 70 is not more than 70, so it would go to a C. In that case, I'm going to add an equals there, and I'm going to add an equals there. So just to make sure that this conditional operator here is completely clear, if we score a value of 80 and I was to run the application, we'd now get your score is A. Whereas if I was to leave it as it was before, as score is more than 80, and run the application again, it would get your score is B. Even though if a student scores 80, you may want to give them the A. So in this case, we'd have to say if it's more than or equal to 80. Run the application, and you get your score is A. Now let's have a look at nesting if statements. So I'm going to create another variable, and it's going to be of type Boolean, and it's going to be called isScience equals false. This Boolean represents whether or not the score of this particular exam is for the topic of science. So we'll imagine that there's multiple topics, maths, science, English, history. We're going to say whether or not the score is for a science exam or not. And to demonstrate this, we're simply going to say if you are required to retake the test. If you're doing science, then you cannot retake the test. Otherwise, you can retake the test, as it says here. Within this else statement, we're going to add another if statement. So it's essentially a nested if statement. If is science, and we can do that because is science is a Boolean, so it has a value of false initially, curly bracket, and closing curly bracket. Else, opening curly bracket, and the closing curly bracket is right after the printout statement. So we're going to have a printout statement within here, s out, parentheses, quotation marks, you cannot retake the test. So let's change the score now to something that will take us into this part of the if statement. So if I was to change that to, for example, 40, so imagine that the score was 40, which means that none of these conditions here would be satisfied. So it would take us to the else. Once we get into the else, we then have to decide if it's science or not. If the exam is for science, then we're going to print out you cannot retake the test. Otherwise, it will say please retake the test. So currently we've set is science to false, so this exam is not science. So let's run the application and it will say please retake the test. If I change that to true, run the application again, now it says you cannot retake the test because this particular student has achieved both a score that is not within an A, a B or a C and is doing science. Now if I was to change this to something that they would achieve an A, a B or a C, so for example 72, which would achieve a B, then it really doesn't matter whether is science is set to true or false because it would never reach the else part in order to run this if. So let's run the application and you can now see that your score is B. As we said, we hit this if, this resolves to false, we then move to this one which resolves to true, and because this is true it prints it out and it ignores everything after it. So everything within the if statement is ignored. The final thing that I'm going to talk about in this video are ternary if statements. So let's remove this code and again let's type out int score equals 50. So what we're going to do here is simply print out two different messages if we're above or below a certain threshold for the score. And we can do that with a ternary. We have a score variable and we've currently set that to 50. We need a new variable, string value to display equals score more than 80, then quotation marks, good job, otherwise, or else, try again, semicolon to end the statement. And then we want a s out, so print out statement, message, colon, leave a space, plus the value to display. So what we're going to do here in this simple method is print out a message with either good job or try again. And that will be the value of value to display. So what's actually happening on this line here? This is exactly the same as a basic if statement. If score is more than 80, display good job, else try again. But here we're simply just doing it on one line. And this is what's known as a ternary if statement. So we have a condition, score is more than 80, which can either be true or false. The question mark means then, print out good job, the colon is else, try again. If the score is more than 80, then return good job, otherwise or else return try again. Now we know that the score is 50, so 50 is not more than 80, which means that it will not return good job, it will return try again, because that is the else part of this if statement. It will then return try again into the string value to display, and then it will print out message, leave a space, and whatever is in value to display, which, as we said, is the text try again. So let's run that, and you can see that the message is try again. If I now change that to 90, and we know that 90 is more than 80, this resolves to true, which means it prints out the first part of the ternary statement, which is good job. And that is what gets passed to value to display, which in turn is displayed as part of the system out print line statement. Let's run the application again, and you can now see message, good job. So that's everything that we're going to go through in this video. Thank you very much for listening. I really hope you found it useful, and if you did, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe.